Hello everyone, and welcome to day 2 of week 29. We're going to continue with a second reading from the Didache, as it's sometimes called, the teaching of the 12 apostles. We're just continuing right from where we left off. Again, the Didache is the earliest text that we know from the life of the church outside of the New Testament. What we read last week talked about the two essential commandments of the way of life: to love God and to love our neighbor. And it made the point that the way in which we love God is by loving our neighbor. And it sets a high standard of what we need to do, giving generously, accepting insults and attacks without fighting back, and even loving our enemies. This time we'll see how the Didache continues with commandments of what not to do to our neighbor. So, the second commandment of the way of life. The second commandment of the teaching is, you shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not corrupt children. You shall not be sexually immoral. You shall not steal. You shall not practice magic. You shall not engage in sorcery. You shall not abort a child or commit infanticide. You shall not covet your neighbor's possessions. You shall not commit perjury. You shall not give false testimony. You shall not speak evil. You shall not hold a grudge. You shall not be double-minded or double-tongued, for the double tongue is a deadly snare. Your word must not be false or meaningless, but confirmed by action. You shall not be greedy or avaricious, or a hypocrite, or malicious, or arrogant. You shall not hatch evil plots against your neighbor. You shall not hate anyone. Instead, you shall reprove some and pray for some, and some you shall love more than your own life. So really we're continuing on kind of the same theme as last time. There is a radical change required for us who call ourselves Christians. If we follow Christ, we must live in a way that is entirely different from the world around us. Now, some of this doesn't feel too radical. We think it's not a big deal. It's not rare to say, don't murder anybody. It's not that rare to say, don't commit adultery, although we do find a lot of people seem to struggle with this rule. The corrupting children, this remains a deep problem in society, now as then, as of course does sexual immorality. But Christians are called to be different. Theft, again, it's not uncommon to find laws that forbid stealing, but oftentimes, honestly, we tend to think, well, those are more a legal issue than a matter of really right or wrong. If you're hungry, then you're hungry, and we tend to justify things, but there is no justification of these things. For Christians, we're called to live differently. The practicing of magic and sorcery, that maybe doesn't feel as relevant to us now. But then again, we certainly find that stories about this are very popular. And issues of fortune-telling, of astrology, of trying to predict and control the future, these remain as popular as ever before. And at the very least, as Christians, we still have to say this obsession over trying to predict, trying to control, trying to know what the future holds is profoundly unchristian. We are called to trust God and to be faithful to Him. And this really flies in the face of a lot of the things that we tend to do to try to retain control of ourselves. Abortion and infanticide, it's not difficult to see these remain profoundly relevant prohibitions. Christians don't do this. Full stop. Period. This is not acceptable. That doesn't mean that Christians have to believe that it should be illegal. It's not necessarily a political statement, although that's an argument that doesn't really belong here. But Christians cannot do these things. Christians cannot hold that there is anything good or even justifiable about them. We must rather do all that we can to heal the wounds that cause these things. No coveting, no perjury, no false testimony, no evil, no speaking evil, no grudges. These are normal. But what we really have to think about, what we must understand, is the early Christians lived this, and they lived this at the cost of their own possessions. They were known, in fact, it was really irritating to people, because in the ancient world, they didn't only practice abortion, but the exposure of children was a normal thing. If someone had a child and they decided they didn't want that baby, they just were shocked in the modern world when we see that a baby was abandoned left in a dumpster to die. It's uncommon, so it's rare that the children are found before they die. In the ancient world, this was normal, and the Christians were known for going around the streets at night listening for the cries of a dying baby. They rescued them. They raised them themselves. This is the way that the church, from the beginning, dealt with the evils that the world did. They did not participate in themselves, and whatever they could do to right the wrong, to carry the burden of that brokenness themselves, to heal the wound, they did. And from this the church grew, and the witness of these faithful, radically different Christians meant that everyone who saw them was profoundly struck. Why do you live differently? Why are Christians like this? How do you survive? How do you get through life? We see the same sort of thing moving on to this next paragraph then. Don't be double-minded or double-tongued. Well, we would say everyone is double-minded and double-tongued. Everyone thinks one thing and says another. Everyone hates his boss but never admits it, not to the boss. But this isn't the thing that Christians do. They pray for the people who trouble them. They love their enemies, and they follow through on this. This is what we are called to, not to be greedy or avaricious or hypocrites or arrogant or malicious. As it says at the end, those who can be reproved, we reprove. We correct those who are willing to listen. We pray for those who won't listen. And everyone it doesn't really say who we're supposed to love more than our own life. It just says, some you shall love more than your own life. But what we see, this entire picture, is a group of people who are profoundly and completely changed by the presence of Jesus Christ in their lives. This is what we are called to as well. Not just to know the right things or say the right things, but to live like Jesus, to show his love, his sacrifice, his differentness in everything we do and say. This is not something that we can do half-heartedly. It has to be all-consuming and complete for us. It's what we're called to. It's harder to follow. So we pray God will give us strength to do this. And for the rest, well, I'll see you all on day 3. God bless you.